Today we're going to learn a D7 chord, and let's start with just a D major chord. A D major chord is a 3-note chord, and it would normally just be written as a D. And if it just says D, you'll know that means D major. A D major chord is made up of the notes D, F sharp, and A. In the case of this D chord voicing, we have a D, an A, another D, and the F sharp is on top. Now, if we want to make this chord a D7 chord is a 4-note chord, and it would have the 7th degree added to a D chord. The 7th degree, the lowered 7th degree, and more on that later. So the notes would be D, F sharp, A, and C. So in this D chord, we had the D and the A, and we had another D, see, so we have 2 Ds, no reason for 2 Ds, except it sounds sort of bigger, and then an F sharp. So we're going to take this second D that we have here, this repeated D, and instead of it being a D, we're going to make it a C. We're going to take it down D, C sharp, C, D, C sharp, C. There's the C, the 7th that we want to play. And the rest of the notes that we played in that D chord are going to remain the same, but they'll be played with different fingers. Can you see that? Here's the D chord, and here's the D7 chord, you see? It's only the one note that moved, this one here, the D, moved down to this note here, the C. We had to sort of do a little bit of a flip around with our fingering, but all that flipping around only yielded this one new note of C. And this one new note, with the other notes of the D chord, creates a D7 chord, sounding like. All right, very, very common change is to go from a D chord, being the 1 in the key, to the D7 chord, to the G chord. And the G chord that I'm going to use today is this G chord like this. All right, now this G chord doesn't have the doubled 5th. No doubled 5th. Right? It's just lift that, and this is just an alternative G major chord voicing. And the spelling of that voicing is G, B, D, G, another B, and another G. Let's go back to our D chord, to the D7, moving to the G chord. Now you may be wondering why I threw in a G major chord voicing and a slightly different voicing of that chord. It's because this chord progression of the D to the D7 and then to the G, that's very common progression. The voices sound much nicer when they're moving to this inversion or voicing of a G chord. I'll show you what I mean. Let's just listen to that. Here's the D, and then moving to the D7 in preparation for moving to the G. So this top note of the D7 chord is going to move to there, where that middle voice, the 7th, in this case, right, 7th, is going to move down. So that's a really nice, nice change that we get. We get this, I'll just play these notes on top. And that's why we changed that G major chord voicing, in order to get those voices moving on the inside. And at the top we have and on the third string. So those three voices moving. So let's go from, let's create a chord progression, one measure of D, one measure of D7, one measure of G, and resolving to the D, giving us a full 4-measure progression. Here we go, always from the root as usual. D7, again, let's hear those voices. Yeah, that works nicely. And let's just take a look at whatever common fingers that we might have in order to make those transitions nice and clean and easier. So from the D chord, we don't really have too much in common here. So D chord to the D7. And then we have the finger 3 that can guide to the G, and then we can pivot around that finger 3. And then I keep that finger 3 down for as long as possible, pivot around, and then flip the change like that. I'll show you once again. All right. Now, let's just for a moment consider this G major chord here with the duplicated fifth. It's the first one that we learned. And one of the reasons we learned that to begin with was because it has so much stability built into that third finger. You know, that third finger can be used as a common finger all the time. And so it, you know, and not to mention that it is also a really nice, robust sounding chord with the two fifths and the 2 roots, 3 roots. But this is also a very useful chord and just equally as relevant. But you can hear it sounds a little bit lighter, right? This G chord than this one, right? But in the case of a D chord moving to a D7 and then to a G and back to a D, the voice movement in this case, voice meaning another word for the notes in the chord, move more nicely, move more in a more interesting way when we voice the G major chord with the 2/3 or in this way here. So D to the D7 being a 4-note chord with the C in it, and then those notes of C and F sharp resolving to the G chord and then returning back to the D major